I thank everyone for showing up. The last thing between your week and a 3-day weekend, so thank you. I'm honored and I'm impressed. And when I was thinking about the people to thank for the seminar, if you ever sit down and start thinking about everyone who's helped you do stuff, it's like you can't put it all together. I couldn't put it all together. And so I put all these names up, and this is really just many of these, many others. There are a lot of people that come together to help all of us do whatever we do, and I'm grateful to all of them, and I'm grateful to all of you guys for being here. So, welcome to the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene, however you want to pronounce it, is a new age, a new era that we have entered as humans have affected and altered just about every square inch of the planet. So it's a new geological era. Geologists have jumped on board, and of course, as you know, we name the eras through Earth's history, and the most recent, the Holocene, has been the era that ushered in humans. We evolved in the Holocene, but now, well, maybe the Pleistocene, earliest humans appear. But now because of all of our activities on the planet at a global scale, at a geological scale, the era we're living in now is called the Anthropocene, named after us, which is a dubious distinction. And it's a problem in the sense that we're altering the Earth, the geochemical cycles, we're altering the ocean, we're altering our atmosphere, our landscape. We're altering the planet way faster than it has been changed throughout geological history, except perhaps when the bolides struck 65 million years ago and caused extinction of the dinosaurs. So we're living in a really crazy and interesting time, and there are problems associated with the Anthropocene, and that's kind of the context of changes to our planet and reptilian responses. But I don't want this to be a downer talk. There's hope and there are solutions, and I want us to try to focus on that as we move through. So probably, in my view, the biggest problem with the Anthropocene is not climate change, although climate change is a big part of this, but it's a loss of biological diversity. We are in the midst of a sixth extinction, which sounds really awful. But if you look over the course of Earth's history, you'll see they're preserved in the fossil record. There are 5 really big extinction events. The End-Ordovician extinction, where about 86% of species were lost. The late Devonian, the End-Permian was the most devastating extinction event the Earth has seen. 95% of species were lost. 80% lost at the end of the Triassic 200 million years ago. 65 million years ago, the most famous one was ushered in the extinction of the dinosaurs, 76% of species lost. And there's been some smaller ones since then. But now we're in the midst of most species on the planet, significant numbers in all groups of vertebrates and invertebrates and plants, and are threatened with extinction. Many species. We can't even say how many species because we only know maybe to less than an order of magnitude how many species there are on the planet. There are more organisms going extinct than we can keep up with because we don't know how many there are. We're really in our infancy in terms of understanding biological diversity on the planet. And this sounds really bad. Like, oh my gosh, the sixth extinction. It sounds really bad, and we're really good, we humans are really good at focusing on bad news, because that's kind of how media works. But if you step back and you look at where we are right now on the planet, there's maybe 5% of our species we've lost. Humans started working at it back 10,000 years ago when we extinguished the megafauna. And so we've certainly had an impact. But the vast majority of species are still here on the planet, and they deserve our attention and our hope. And it's not over; it's barely beginning. So again, I want to keep that hope in it. And then this point about why should it matter? Well, the biological diversity on our planet is part of who we are. And as all of you know, you are not an individual organism. You're a collection of thousands of organisms, billions of cells that don't even belong to you. So, so why the 6 extinctions should matter is that it's going to take us with it if we follow through at the rate we're going. So part 1 of my talk is going to be we're going to talk about reptilian responses to these changes on the planet. And part 1 is reptilian responses to roads. So how do reptiles respond to roads? Roads fragment habitats, and they do a lot of things. There's about 200 billion square miles of roads on the planet. I was reading about this, trying to remember the statistic, which is equivalent to about an area the size of the state of Utah. It's easy for me to remember because that's where I grew up. That's a lot of area. And it would be nice to think that reptiles would respond like this old rattlesnake and be able to tell the story about when they get run over by the truck or whatever. But the basic response of reptiles to roads is death. They don't respond very well to being run over by vehicles. And they're particularly vulnerable because many other animals that cross roads can move a lot faster than a reptile. And many reptiles don't have any legs, as you know, and some of them are pretty long, and they go across the road and they present a larger area for vehicles to hit. So reptilian responses to roads, this part of the talk is work done by 2 amazing undergraduate students who are here in the audience, Adrian Slade and Tyler Larson. Tyler took this picture. And what I'll present is sort of some of the factors that influence snake road mortality on roads, snake mortality on roads. And they did this study. They've been going out on roads for about 3 years and collecting snakes. And a great way, we herpetologists, a great way to find snakes is to cruise roads and look for them along the highway. These guys did not start this study. This study wasn't done by them for science, to collect data on road mortality. I encouraged them to do this, and of course this is a big part of it. But their motivation was to save snakes. They wanted to rescue snakes from cars on roads, which is inspiring to me, anyway, to learn. So Adrian and Tyler, over the last this is the Vantage Highway. They've been going out summers, a big chunk of the summers. They spend road cruising, and here's the Vantage Highway, about a 20-kilometer stretch, a 23.5-kilometer stretch of the Vantage Highway, and then they road cruise this stretch of Highway 243, and then they've been road cruising this stretch of Crab Creek, a little part of this highway here. So there are 3 different segments of highways where they've collected data on the snakes they encounter, the species of snakes, the time, the size, and whether they're alive or not. And so when we ask about what factors influence snake mortality on roads, here's our first figure from the data that Adrian and Tyler gathered. This is just last summer, 2017, right? So 3 different highways, Crab Creek, SR4, 243, and Vantage. What would you say, what factors from looking at this would you say affect snake mortality on roads? By the way, Highway 243, I've called it the ribbon of death. That's this highway here. There's the Vantage Highway, and here's the Crab Creek. Crab Creek comes in right here, along here. So which highway do you think is more traveled, more heavily traveled? SR 243, 70% of the snakes they found on that highway, about 200 snakes they found, were dead. Whereas on the other stretches of highway, 25, 30%, only that many were dead. So most of them were alive, and they rescued them and they got them off the highway. Most of the studies, there aren't very many studies on road ecology and snakes. Most of them have mortality rates far higher than this, maybe closer to the 70% mortality, because those investigators are going out on roads looking for dead stuff and picking them up. So one of the factors that's really important is obviously traffic on the highway. So if we're thinking about trying to prevent snake mortality, we need to keep that into consideration. So another important factor is habitat. So here's a cool map that Adrian and Tyler made with the help of Dr. Hickey. I should put Dr. Hickey on there. Should have had him on. So the blue dots, so here's the Vantage Highway. The blue dots are rubber boas, and the red dots are gopher snakes along this highway. And look at that. It's crazy. So these are there's no gopher snakes along this stretch of the highway, and then they're just rubber boas, and the rubber boas stop, and the gopher snakes pick up. And if you want to learn more detail about that, yes?
They're actually, the red dots are night snakes.
Night snakes. Oh, night snakes. It says so right here. Yeah. That's what I meant, night snakes. So the night snakes pick up after the rubber boas drop off, and if you want to learn more about the real story, you can come. If you guys are coming to the Rhine Horse, I don't know if you'll be there, but so another factor then is obviously habitat, and the question is, okay, why are there rubber boas here and only night snakes over here, and why aren't there any rubber boas here? And I asked Adrian about this. It's a ridge, so it has to do with habitat, and so that's an important factor. Snake crossings vary, where the snakes cross vary in space and across species. So another factor is the timing of the activity of the snake. So here's some of the data they showed on when the four species they looked at were gopher snakes, rubber boas, rattlesnakes, and night snakes. And you can see that evening kicks in at about 9, 10 o'clock. There's major activity of rattlesnakes and gopher snakes, and the activity of the rubber boas and the night snakes picks up later at night, closer to midnight. So timing is really important. Time of evening is important when a snake might be more exposed to risk, and this is actually probably a good thing because traffic drops considerably later at night in the summer. And then this figure shows how the snake activity of those four species varies over the course of a summer. And you can see the most dangerous time of year for snake mortality is in the spring, starting in early May and extending into early July. And then still plenty going on in July, especially with rattlesnakes. Drops off a little, comes back. So season is a real important factor. So this isn't just understanding the effects of the roads on the snakes, but it's also really important information that they've gathered on the timing of activity of these different species of snakes. So I'm going to sum this part up with a summary of what are the responses of reptiles to roads. And so here's another. I got to show these. Gary Larson's got some great ones. Have you guys seen this one? So here's the traditional, one of the ideas is snakes like to come out and bask on roads, and they're ectotherms, and they can pick up heat from a road. And in some places, sometimes they do bask on roads. I've seen it lots in the Southwest, and sometimes they do come out and bask. But generally, the response isn't to come out and bask and warm up. It's often their response is direct mortality. Roads take out. It's like a slow bleed, like a hemorrhage, loss of snakes on highways. So there's this gradual hemorrhage. Different individuals are susceptible at different times of year, different species and different habitats. But overall, what it serves to do is fragment habitats, reduce the numbers of individuals and populations. And when you fragment habitats, then you lose connectivity, gene flow across the highway, and a loss of gene flow and connectivity results in a loss of genetic diversity, and that over time can result in cumulative effects of extinction. So it's a real problem. And so let me ask you, here's a truck driver coming up the hill. Did you guys see anything like this on the Vantage Highway? Maybe you did, like late at night when you're really tired. You started seeing snakes in lounge chairs. I mean, I've had dreams of this kind of stuff, where you turn over the rock, So what is that truck driver going to do when he comes up to those snakes in the lounge chairs? Is he going to stop? Is he going to swerve to try to miss them, or is he just going to go plowing through those snakes? What do you think? Probably plowing through the snakes. Well, I would hope that the truck driver would be like Adrian and Tyler and would stop and get the snakes off the road. That's our goal, is that truck drivers will stop and worry about snakes. We're not there yet, perhaps, but that would be the goal. And so the question comes, what good is a snake? Who gives a darn? I mean, why? these guys spent all this time clearing the snakes off the road. Why should we care about that? And some people go out of their way to swerve and run over the snakes. Why should we care? Well, there's a lot of reasons, and the easiest answer is, well, if you know someone who has high blood pressure and they're taking blood pressure medicine, chances are, if it's a ACE inhibitor, Captopro, which is the most common blood pressure drug, it was discovered from peptides in viper venom. Or if you know someone who's had heart surgery and they use blood thinners, likely those compounds were discovered from snake venom. Or blood coagulants, likely those compounds were discovered from snake venom. Or if you appreciate that doctors and scientists understand how nerve impulses work across synaptic membranes so they can treat anything from Alzheimer's to epilepsy, you can thank snakes for the toxins that helped us understand how our basic physiology works. So snakes are responsible for a lot of direct benefits to humans. So that's kind of one answer. And I think a lot of people appreciate that. Probably everyone in this audience would appreciate, biodiversity has benefits. And an example of that is one of the solutions, one of the hopeful signs is this amazing wildlife bridge that people have noticed is going up between here and Snoqualmie Pass. And the Highway Department spent like $6.5 million on this bridge going up. This is taxpayers' dollars, $6.5 million for a bridge to increase connectivity across a major interstate highway. That's pretty amazing. And they built that bridge. One of the arguments, of course, was for safety, highway road safety, but they didn't get that money just because people wanted to be safer. That money came because there were stakeholders and a lot of people working really hard that cared about wildlife and about connectivity and some of the issues I'm talking about that helped to create this bridge. And so there's more to what good is a snake or anything in nature than just its utilitarian value to humans. And so I just want to touch on a little concept, a little point that a friend and a great herpetologist, Harry Green, talks about. And it's the beauty, what is beautiful and what is sublime. And so now, how many of you look at a picture of a snake and see something beautiful? Be honest. Wow, I guess I'm preaching mostly to the choir. Not everyone raised their hand. Most people would look at a snake and get the shivers or the willies or whatever. They don't see that as beautiful. But they might look at a flower and think it's beautiful, or some other organism that they enjoy. I look at a snake and I get the shivers. It's beautiful. And I see the beauty in the shape of the rattle, in the keeled scales, and the vomeronasal organs, and the loreal pits. And when it flicks its tongue, I mean, it's beautiful. The eyes are beautiful. The way the scales shimmer is beautiful. The way it blends into its habitat. There's a lot of beauty, and I'm sure all of you have your favorite organisms where you can see that beauty. And that's one thing that's easy to understand. But sublime, and this came from Immanuel Kant actually, but Harry Green brings this to the forefront. The sublime is when we consider all the interactions and the way that organism fits into nature and into evolution, and we understand something about maybe the components in the venom, the way that vomeronasal system works, maybe the other snakes that this snake is interacting with, maybe the way it moves, where it goes, and you start looking at those connections, and you realize that you're connected to that snake, or maybe when you're walking in the forest in nature, everyone's experienced that sense of sublime when you feel connected to nature. And that is the aesthetic value of any species if we take the time to learn something about it. And I believe that's what's making it so we're building wildlife bridges over I-90, and we have to cultivate that somehow as biologists, in ourselves, in our friends, our family, our children, our community, the truck drivers that we interact with, whatever. In my view, that's what's going to really help to make it so highways become safer for wildlife. All right, so part 2, snakes and fire. So climate change has has ushered in longer fire seasons in some parts of the planet. This is a study done recently, over 35 years of wildfire records. Some parts of the planet have shorter fire seasons. Here in the Pacific Northwest, our fire seasons have gotten longer. Drought has accelerated that, as has log fire suppression and other things. So the Pacific Northwest has plenty of fires, as we all can appreciate. A few years ago, a graduate student came out here from Cornell, or a student came out here from Cornell, but some of you might remember Joey Chase. Joey was all gung-ho and ready to study rattlesnakes, and we communicated, and I'm saying, yeah, there's some great dens up by George, Frenchman's Coulee, you can come out, we can study those. And so like the day after Joey arrived, we went out to look at our den, and this is what we saw. The George fire of 2015. And so Joey and I are talking. It's like, well, Joey, what do you want to study about rattlesnakes while you're here? And he's like, well, maybe fire. So Joey, around the same time, you guys probably remember the Carlton Complex fire, summer of 2014, largest wildfire in Washington state history. The Okanagan Complex. So these are two big fires up in the Methow, and our colleague John Rohr has been doing rattlesnake work up there, and so he helped Joey. We got together and we kind of planned a study to look at the effects of these fires. We had the Taylor Bridge fire here near Ellensburg in 2012, and then again the George fire in 2015. So Joey decided he was going to try to understand what response to fire was from the rattlesnakes. And so we couldn't figure out how do you measure how a rattlesnake responds to fire. It's kind of hard. You can't see what happens. So we decided we have this technique of measuring the rattles. So each time a rattlesnake sheds, it grows a new segment on its rattle. And so the last time the snake shed, it grew that segment. The time before that, it grew that segment, and on down the line. And once they reach their second to third year of life, our rattlesnakes, our Northern Pacific rattlesnakes, shed once a year. Very consistently, one shed per year in the wild. And so we had known from before, if you measure the width of that basal rattle segment and you measure the length of the snake, there's a very strong correlation between the rattle segment and snake length. So you can actually, from those basal rattle segments right here, you can estimate the size of the snake very accurately. And because each segment on a rattle was at one time the basal rattle segment, preserved in the rattle is a history of growth of the snake, kind of like tree rings. So Joey got excited about that and decided then we could actually look for differences in growth rate as perhaps a measure of response by the rattlesnakes to fire. So here's one of the snakes that Joey measured, and he set up this device with the camera. And so here's a snake. This was its growth in 2015. This snake was measured in 2016. So 2015, 2014, 13. You can see that 2012 was a good year for that snake. The rattle's pretty wide. Rattles can actually shrink a little bit if the snakes aren't eating or females are breeding or reproducing, having babies. And so you can compare different groups of snakes and look and compare growth rates. And so, for example, this is from a data set from before. You can see the growth rates of males and female rattlesnakes, and as females reach a certain size, their growth rate slows down and males continue to grow. And Joey wanted to find out if that was the case for snakes that were exposed to fire or not. And by the way, this happens because when females reach sexual maturity, they start having offspring, they shunt energy to babies rather than growth, and so their growth slows down, but males continue to grow, in most populations anyway. So Joey chose 37 snakes in dens that were affected by fire up in the Methow, and then 48 snakes in dens that were not affected by fire, same region. And he compared the growth rates of the snakes, and he didn't find any differences in growth rates. But what he did find, interestingly, was differences in population structure. So at the dens that were influenced by fire, snakes tended to be smaller. The smaller individuals were better represented in the population, in dens that did not receive fire, there tended to be more larger snakes, and that turned out to be a significant difference between the dens affected by fire and the dens that weren't. And our interpretation of that was that at the dens where there were fires, the larger snakes were more vulnerable, and they're probably the ones that got edited out. And so that was an interesting result. He didn't find, looking at the growth rates, here's his graph on the growth rates of the snakes, he didn't find any difference between fire and non-fire sites, but we observed some interesting anecdotal evidence. So this is a survivor of the Taylor Bridge fire. When we went to that den after the fire, and this is a den I'd been studying before that had hundreds of snakes, we only found one snake. We found evidence of a few more, maybe a dozen, but we found very, very few snakes at the den. And the one that we did find that we were able to measure, this was in 2015. We took this picture. So there's his basal rattle, 2015. There's a rattle from, well, this would have been like 2014. That would be 2013. This would be 2012. So this would be the year after the Taylor Bridge fire. That rattle's really shrunken. And that's a survivor. Probably most of the snakes didn't survive that fire. So there can be direct effects, but probably like roads, if a snake's in the way of a fire, it's going to get edited out. If it's a smaller snake, perhaps it can find refuge easier, and that's what we think might be going on with Joey's data. Okay, so now I want to move from the temperate dry forests here in the Pacific Northwest to the tropical dry forests of Mexico. So here in Washington, we have, in Washington State, we have 19 species of lizards and snakes, which pretty cool. If you go to Jalisco, Mexico, a state that's less than half the size of Washington, there's 158 species of lizards and snakes. So if you're into lizards and snakes, this is a really, really cool place, not to mention all the other amazing things about it. So I want to tell you a little about the work we've been doing there and the response of reptiles to disturbance in the tropical dry forest, to changes of a warming planet. So there's this place in Mexico. So it's down here in coastal Jalisco, south of Puerto Vallarta, about 150 miles. It's this field station. This is a field station perched on a hill in some of the most pristine tropical dry forest left on the planet. And this is the Pacific Ocean. Puerto Vallarta is like up here a few miles, and there's a bay here. And so it's a coastal tropical dry forest. So it's pretty warm in the summer, and they get the rain in the summer. Mexico doesn't really have a huge number of protected natural areas. It's growing, but our place is here along the coast of Jalisco, and it's one of the few. It's pretty rare. There aren't enough tropical dry forest reserves in Mexico, and so here's the field station is part of a biosphere reserve, and perched right here on the coast. So, tropical deciduous forest. It's a dry forest, and the trees lose their leaves in response to drought rather than cold, like our deciduous forest here in temperate regions. And so this is what the forest looks like at the extreme part of the dry season, just right at the end of June 2011. It looks like it's dead, but it's not. The trees are just sleeping. And it can transform into a verdant green forest within just a couple of weeks. And this summer, 2 weeks after this photograph was taken, that's what the forests look like. It's amazing. So tropical deciduous forests are known for their extreme seasonality. And all the organisms in these forests evolved in response to a really strong dry season and a very strong wet season. And so there's a suite of adaptations that organisms have that enable them to deal with seasonal drought. And it's a great place for reptiles because reptiles can do really well long periods without food, and they love the thermal diversity, all the temperature diversity in the forest, because they're ectotherms and they regulate their body temperature through their environment. Marvelous place for reptiles, but also an amazing place for plants and insects and all other organisms. So we have a history in this place. I did part of my PhD work there in the 80s. And after I got to Central, we couldn't wait to get doing stuff in Mexico. And over time, things grew, and we went on sabbatical there. And so these are some pictures at the sign, Estación de Biología Chimela. There's our sign, and these are different groups of students that have gone there over the years, and they've done some amazing things, and it's been just one of the best parts of my career, being able to do this. So we have this long history at the field station. Here's where we work. This is a field station run by the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, the big national university in Mexico City. They have this little satellite field station. And it's a beautiful place. There are dormitories where the students can stay, and the faculty stay in this other dormitory. There's an office, and there's a kitchen where the amazing food, the cooks make this amazing food. And there's a cool water tower you can climb up on and get a great view of the forest. It's a wonderful place to work, wonderful people. And so over the years, this guy here, Andres, is a student I went to grad school with back in the 80s, and we've been friends ever since. And so we've been doing work on looking at how animals cope with that intense seasonality in the forest. We've done, some of you might remember Taggart, who was a undergrad here, and then he did his master's here, and he worked on turtles in the forest. He's still down there, and now he's turned pretty much Mexican. He got married, and he's doing his PhD at UNAM, and so we have this history, lots of student projects over the years at the field station, more than I can even talk about. And one of the things we've done that's really fun is set up these pitfall traps and sample lizard species assemblages. I'll share a little bit of that with you. And a few years ago, Chris and I and our kids lived there on a sabbatical, and we lived in a little town where all the workers. So here's a picture of the workers at the field station. These people are like family to us. Our kids went to school there, and you know how kids connect you with everyone in the community. So we got to know the stakeholders, and there's our son Langdon a long time ago with his friend, and it's just we've developed have a big data set over a long time of lots of stuff going on at the field station. And not long after we came back from that sabbatical, Hurricane Hova hit the field station, and this is the first hurricane that had hit that part of the Pacific coast in over 50 years. Last one was in the 50s in Manzanillo, and it was like, oh my gosh, it was a lot of water, a lot of rain, a lot of flooding, and it knocked over a lot of these big cacti. And we even had a team of students the next year in our class study the effects on the cacti. We had no idea what was coming. But Gabe Stryker and I wrote a grant proposal, because all this time we had there. I wrote a proposal to the National Science Foundation, turned it in about our work, to do more work and take students there. And we turned it in August of 2015. And in October of 2015, the largest hurricane, the most powerful hurricane ever measured, most intense tropical cyclone ever recorded in the Western Hemisphere, hit directly. Look at this line here. So here's a line of the hurricane right directly over the field station, hit right in that forest, and it was terrifying. So let's talk a little bit about hurricanes and how this relates to a changing, warming planet. So here's a satellite map of where hurricanes form on the planet. This is a really cool website to look at this stuff. And so the hurricanes in the eastern Pacific off the west coast of Mexico, they form from the heat. Heat in the ocean is what creates a hurricane. And the more heat you have in the water, the more force for the air to rise, and the greater the strength of the hurricanes that can be generated. These hurricanes move to the west, and then sometimes they turn north into the mainland. Usually these hurricanes just go out out into the ocean, and they don't cause any harm to land. Some of the other largest hurricanes are generated in the western Pacific and hit into Indonesia and Asia. And so we know that a warming planet is creating stronger hurricanes. And people who model climate change and hurricanes came up, this study was published the month before Hurricane Patricia hit the field station. And their conclusion was, we don't expect necessarily more tropical storms, but an increasing number of particularly strong ones, categories 4 and 5. And their model showed the development and the conclusion of where the strongest hurricanes are going to be. And the strongest place on the planet was right here, off the coast where we work in Mexico. And then the next month, October 23rd, the strongest hurricane measured, Patricia, hit our field station. Luckily, when it made landfall, the winds diminished a little bit, and it wasn't quite as catastrophic as it could have been. But these are the major tropical cyclones around the Earth. Most of the big ones have happened in recent years, based on this analysis of climate. So, ocean temperature has a big effect on the strength of hurricanes. And then this study just came out last week in Science and found that the oceans are heating up 40% faster than we thought. So we can expect stronger hurricanes, and we're seeing that, right? We can expect stronger hurricanes around the world, and so it's important to understand how our natural systems are going to be affected by them. We focus on humans, but it's also really important to understand how natural systems will be affected. So let's talk about that. So here's Hurricane Patricia, the last graph of weather data. This just shows this pulse of wind speed. This is getting up to 150 mile per hour wind speeds, and barometric pressure near 900 millibars, which was the lowest barometric pressure ever measured in the Western Hemisphere in a storm, and it still is. So when the storm hit the field station, everyone had evacuated. It could have been a whole lot worse. Like I say, the winds diminished as it made landfall. There wasn't a ton of water, so it hit and moved through really fast. But it knocked out the windows in the library. This is a library. It basically ripped anything that wasn't bolted to the roof, or part of the roof was torn off. The weather station that was on top of the office got turned into spaghetti, and buildings were damaged. But what we're really focused on, the buildings have been repaired and it's fine now. Nobody died in our town or at the field station. There were some deaths related to trees falling in some other places. Well, here's some of the impacts on the surrounding towns. This is where we lived in our little town. So basically the biggest problem was people's roofs were stripped off their houses. And right after this hurricane, some of you might remember, we did a fund drive here at Central, and we got $5,000 of relief, and we took it down in December. And half of that money got used to help people put roofs on their houses, and the other half got used to open the trail network at the field station. So some flooding, but not major flooding, again, because that storm moved through so quickly, the rains didn't pick up. Often what happens in these hurricanes is they come and hit inland, they slow down, and then they rain in the mountains, and people think, oh, we made it through the hurricane, and then the next day the water from the mountains comes down and floods the river, and it's horrible. So our Sobre Mexico program, that NSF grant that we applied for before the hurricane, once we started the program, we realized, oh my gosh, we have an opportunity because we have all this data from before the hurricane. Let's use this program to try to understand the effects of the hurricane on this forest. So we've had 2 groups come through so far, summer of 2017, summer of 2018, and there's some of the Sobre crew for this year in the audience for summer of 2019. I should have your pictures up there too, but you haven't started the work yet. So we've worked on a number of projects, and I'll share with you some of what these students and other students that take the class have discovered. So first of all, how did the hurricane change the forest? Well, when those winds came through, it broke a lot of trees, it broke branches, it knocked trees over, and it really opened up the forest canopy. So what was shady before was now open. And you can see from the data, these were data that the students from 2017 recorded. 10 centimeters above ground, so close to the ground surface, the canopy opened up from almost 95% cover to maybe 65% cover. And above, farther up, the canopy opened up even more after the hurricane. So more open canopy, more sunlight penetrating. You can see all the trees that had fallen, all the broken limbs. Here's some photographs of the standing up on the library roof. So this is October 2014, before Hurricane Patricia. This is the day after Hurricane Patricia. The day before, so October's still wet season, the forest is still green. So the day before this photograph was taken, or a couple days before, the forest was all green. And when that storm came through, it knocked the branches off and broke a bunch of trees, but it basically defoliated, just ripped the leaves off of all the trees. And so now it looks like the dry season. And then I went down there in December, and this is a photograph I tried to match. I took from the same area of the forest. So after all the trees are broken and damaged, it rained. The rain that came with the hurricane, the trees, their leaves grew right back. And that's how this forest evolved. It responds to drought, and if the leaves are gone, they'll grow back. So it jumped right back, and it was like, oh, it was hopeful. You know, it looked green, but it was pretty severely damaged. And you can see how that canopy opened up from before versus after. And driving along the roads there, everything is just more open. You can see farther. It's very different after the hurricane. The other thing the hurricane did was it dumped woody debris into the understory of the forest. So all these branches and limbs and things drop into the forest floor, and you can see woody debris increases significantly, work that students did. It makes it a lot more difficult to walk through the forest. That's Taylor trying to track toads. I'm realizing I'm going to have to speed up a little bit here to finish up. So woody debris is a big thing that has totally altered the system. So here's a picture before the hurricane and the same perspective after the hurricane. And you can see this arroyo forest. So the forest down in the drainages, sometimes they're dry, sometimes they're wet. The water table's higher, they're wetter. So the trees in the arroyo forest tend to be larger, and many of them don't lose their leaves even during the dry season. And then the upland forests farther up, those trees tend to be more deciduous, and when the forest dries, they drop their leaves. And you might not be able to tell so well from these pictures, but basically when that storm came through, it kind of gave the forest a haircut. These trees are a lot thinner. The arroyo forest in particular is much thinner. So there are implications for temperature there. So here's some temperature measurements from before the hurricane, looking at a gradient from the arroyos down low here. So this is lower Buo. It's a different arroyo than these pictures show, but down in the arroyos in this forest, temperature, and then moving up a gradient up into the upland forest. And you can see how over the course of a few days, temperature varies. Air temperature in the arroyos doesn't get as hot, but it gets much hotter up in these uplands because they're more open and temperatures increase. And likewise with surface temperatures, it's even more striking. The arroyos are sort of the cooler places of the forest, and lots of creatures move into those arroyos to escape that heat. After the hurricane, this is crazy, but because the arroyos were opened up, so here again is a graph of before the hurricane. This is in Buo, same arroyo, and you can see how cool the lower arroyos remain in relation to the upper parts, to the uplands. This is surface temperature. But now, after the hurricane, the arroyos are just as hot as the uplands. There's no moderating effect from that forest canopy because forest canopy is gone down in the arroyos. And that's really altered the structure of the forest and how the animals respond to it. But the other thing that happened is all that woody debris was dumped in, and so instead of having a forest canopy to moderate temperatures, now there's woody debris. And so you can see this under the woody debris, this green line, the temperatures are moderated a lot in relation to the open surface. And so the woody debris becomes really important for thermoregulation, especially if you're an ectotherm. And so that's interesting. So here's kind of more of what it looked like before the forest and more before the hurricane, and a little more close-up after of the woody debris. And so how did that affect the lizards? So here's one of our transects lizard. We have pitfall rays going up this hill. We're catching lizards in these buckets. They run along, they crawl along, they bump into this fence, and they fall in the bucket. And it's super fun. It's like Christmas every morning. You find these lizards in the buckets. And so here are the main species in our assemblage of lizards. And they all are ground-dwelling lizards, and some of them are leaf litter specialists. This guy likes to hang out more in the leaf litter. All of them spend time foraging for bugs in the leaf litter. These guys, these whiptail lizards, use their snouts as little beaks, and they sort of dig through. They're like chickens almost. They dig through and feed on the bugs and leaf litter. These little guys, this is a skink that lives down underneath more. And so before the hurricane, the way this assemblage was structured is these guys, so this is a Spitacellus lineatissima, these guys dominated the uplands, and these other lizards, some of the other lizards dominated the arroyos. And after the hurricane, the Spitacellus lineatissima no longer was dominating in the uplands. It moved more into the arroyos, more of a movement into the arroyos. And many of the lizards that were more common in the arroyos started to move up into the uplands a little bit more. And so what was a difference in the structure of the lizard communities before the hurricane, the arroyo and upland communities differed significantly before the hurricane. After the arroyo and upland species assemblages, I should say, are basically the same. So the hurricane served to sort of equalize the differences we had before in the lizards, the community, the lizard species assemblages. So, and for turtles, so Taggart had been tracking those turtles, and last year, Jess Luna, and the year before that, Cameron Cupp tracked turtles and looked at their use of habitat. Not surprisingly, before the hurricane, turtles used more leaf litter. After the hurricane, turtles used more woody debris as shelters, more tree stumps as shelters. There's a turtle right there by this tree stump. There's a turtle here under all this woody debris. There's a turtle with a radio transmitter on him. We track him with radios. And there's Jess tracking the turtles. Last summer, Jess followed their paths. Taggart helped construct home range maps. The turtles' home ranges have constricted. They're smaller than they were before the hurricane. It's harder for them to move through the forest. All that woody debris restricts their movements. And we found that they tend to like to move through the open leaf litter and less through the tough woody debris. And they don't move as much. Or if they do move as much, they don't move as far because they're restricted by all that woody debris. Woody debris also probably might have an effect on the amphibians. In the water, the woody debris can help to trap water and create micropools for amphibian larvae to develop. And so that's, Stacy started this project. We still have work to do on it. The woody debris provided shelters so we tracked cane toads in the forest to try to understand where they go. And these are famous invasive species in Australia, but very little work has been done on them where they're native, and they're native to southern Mexico. So we put radio transmitters in the cane toads and we tracked them, and we're trying to find out where do they go when it's really dry. And this is a peak of the dry season. They went under the fallen trunks of these trees from the hurricane. And then after the rainy season started, they took off and we couldn't find them. They're crazy. So the woody debris has huge effects after the hurricane for lots of organisms, probably woodpeckers. So this is Kenya and her mentor, Mexican scientist, Elisa, at the field station. There's now all these snags, all these broken trees that serve as habitat for cavity nesters, and especially the wood decomposers, the fungi, the longhorn beetles that bore into wood and feed on the wood, the termites. The creatures in the forest are having a heyday on all that wood, and they're decomposing it fairly rapidly. So, to conclude, the forest is coming back. It was really sad to see the original damage from the hurricane. It's kind of like seeing a fire in the Pacific Northwest. Your favorite forest is like burned, and it's heartbreaking, and then you go back a few years later and you watch it start to recover. And that's what's happening with this forest. It evolved with this incredible seasonality, and it's got the species in the forest, there are enough adaptations that it's so far seeming to come back pretty well from the storm. I wanted to show you. This is just going to be a little bit of a video of the drone that our son Langdon, some drone footage he took. This is 2017, so it's not quite 2 years after the hurricane. So you can see the arroyo forest, it's greener. This is in March, the dry season. This is probably what it'll look like when we go down this spring, you guys. But this arroyo forest is opened up. You can see a lot of the trees that are broken. You can see some of the limbs that are broken off. This is a perspective we could never get from before the hurricane. Sorry about that. Hope nobody's going to throw up. So let me just fast forward this a little bit so you can see kind of get a feel for the structure of this forest. And then, let's see, right? Where's the field station? There it is. Did I go by? There it is. There's the field station up on the hill right there. So things are coming back, and a big part of this is the diversity. There's amazing diversity in the tropical dry forest. 1,200 species of vascular plants, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals. Incredible biological diversity. Maybe not as much as in a tropical rainforest, but there's a lot of different roles that these species provide. There are decomposers. There are trees that store water in their stems. There are trees that are really hard, and trees that grow along the arroyos. A diversity of adaptations, a great diversity of species in the forest that help the system to recover from disturbance. Superimposed on that is something really, really fascinating. I recently read a book by Rob Dunn called Never Home Alone. If you want a good read, you got to read this book. And so this Rob looked at biological diversity in our homes. And ecologists have known for a long time that biological diversity in nature is connected with resilience, with recovery from disturbance. And he realized that the way humans were always working to kill all our pathogens. We use disinfectant soaps, we scrub our houses, we kill all the spiders we find, we call exterminators if we find anything we don't like. By eliminating the biological diversity in our homes, we've actually released all the competitors away from the potentially harmful species, especially bacterial pathogens. And people who grow up in environments where they don't have exposure to a diversity of bacteria, a good, robust ecological community of bacteria, actually have a lot higher likelihood of developing autoimmune disease, celiac disease, type 1 diabetes, allergies, and the biological diversity in our homes, on our skin, and certainly in our microbiome is really important. And we're just starting to understand how important biological diversity is for our own health. We've understood it for our planet for a while, but we're just in our infancy. And so we take these critters and show them to kids in the schools. And I think as we understand the importance of biological diversity, I think we're on the road to what I'm thinking of like as an Anthropocene revolution, where the Anthropocene doesn't have to be the era where humans destroy the planet. It might seem that way right now, but it can actually be when humans come back to living connected to nature and to understanding interactions on the planet, and that if we can maintain biological diversity in our forests and in our shrub steppe and in our homes, we're going to have a lot higher probability of weathering the Anthropocene and maybe making it through and maybe not causing the sixth extinction. So I'm sorry I went a little over time, but that's it. Thank you very much.